Good evening from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 6 p.m. on the dot on the 11th of July 2025. It's Friday evening. To my Jewish friends, family and fellow congregants, although I don't have a congregation anymore, but Shabbat Shalom. Many blessings from my sacred space to your sacred space, regardless of religion, creed or culture, wherever you are on planet Earth. I'm more of a universalist than a Jew now, but it's a very typical thing for Jews to be universalist, since we believe in the Holy One being one merged, united source field, in a sense, to put it technically. Anyway, Shabbat Shalom, Sabbath peace to you all. We all need peace in our lives, people of Earth. It was a beautiful day today, very beautiful, but it was a very emotionally distressing day for me. I did this to myself, people of Earth, because I like to keep abreast of the situation of what's going on with our global elites and our health systems post-COVIDian epoch, you understand. Because I was very suspicious when that was brought in the first instance, that it was going to go very, very bad very quickly, and alas, some of my suspicions have come to fruition. And I won't bother discussing that anymore with you, but if you're of a fairly solid, clear-minded space, and i.e. you've got the stomach for it, I recommend watching How the NHS Killed Her Daughter, The Killing of Paloma Shamirani, and it's on Resistance GB, or a documentary by Resistance GB, Great Britain. It's available on YouTube. That was very, very, very fucking chilling watching that, how her daughter was in effect murdered by paramedics. And she goes into a lot more discussion about that, but part of the broader picture is, and I don't know how much of that's going on here in Australia, but I they all went into lockstep with the COVID, so they're quite capable of lockstepping and other uglinesses too. So she described what was going on was in effect organ harvesting, which is a very chilling thought. And I personally got very, very distressed because she mentioned how the elderly were withheld fluids, which is a form of torture, even though they were terminable. There is no reason why you can't withhold fluids to people. And I, out of lack of medical knowledge, didn't know that. I participated in that back in March 2010, when my mother died, because they said nil by mouth. I didn't know that that's a human rights violation, and causing dehydration is a very painful way to die. I did fight them every inch of the way. Every time I went home to rest, I'd come back and I'd look at the chart and I'd read that they'd withheld the morphine. So I did fight them about that, but it never occurred to me, because I'm not a trained nurse or a health professional, that withholding fluids was another form of killing her. And let's be fair here. We'll be fair here. She was dying of advanced Alzheimer's. But, you could let your elderly people go with some kind of dignity. There was no need to withhold a sip of water occasionally. It was just vile. And it didn't occur to me till I listened to this woman speaking about how they were withholding food and water and told to not even give food or water to the patients, even if they begged, that I realised Same thing was done back in 2010 to my own mother. So you can imagine how I felt after that. Very distraught and fragile. You know, I did everything I could to make sure she was comfortable for her end, chasing medical staff to make sure they gave her the morphine pain relief, which they complained about, called me in and yelled at me, and I said, "It's your mother, you do the same." I said, "She's my mother and my monster, but she's a human being and she needs to be kept comfortable for her passing." They resented even the morphine. In the end, they did call in the palliative team doctor, who viewed me with a fair bit of suspicion too. And I just said, "You need to keep her comfortable. That's your job. That's why you're going to palliative care." So they agreed to give her a Grayson pump so that she was allegedly being given a steady stream of morphine whenever that pump decides that she needs it. I don't know how that works. Allegedly she was kept comfortable. Well, anyway, I was satisfied with that because I could see they'd compromised, because they couldn't keep the staff, couldn't keep up the morphine to her, and I couldn't be there 24/7, waiting for them to slack off the minute I turned my back to go and get a cup of tea or something for dinner, or go home to rest, which was very debilitating. When you have a parent or a close family member dying, you live between two separate worlds. Your world, where you're healthy and, well, as healthy as you can be, alive, and you're dying, partner, parent, close friend, lover, child, relative. It's it's hard to explain. It's kind of like a Twilight Zone existence where you're trying to be there for them and make sure that they're comfortable and getting all their needs met, but then you're also trying to be there for yourself. And I don't know, maybe I felt it worse than other people because I'm a trauma survivor, and there was all that kind of abject horror mixed into the emotions with my mother because of all the viciousness over the years. But I tried to do the right thing by her. So when I saw today that withholding fluids is a form of torture, and I actually went, because I remember the nursing staff saying to me, "We can't be here all the time, you're here watching over your mother. Just swab the inside of her mouth so she's got some moisture in her mouth." And I did that. I did wipe inside her mouth just to keep her mouth, from being completely dried and the tongue glued to a roof. And then it didn't really enter my mind because I'm obeying instructions from actual registered nurses. I think after she died, I kind of thought, why did we have to swab her mouth? Why couldn't they have just given her a sip of water? It didn't enter my mind till after she had died. Took her 3 weeks to die, by the way, my mother, strong as a horse. Mind was completely gone, but strong as a horse. She even had about, I think it was 2 weeks before her death, a case of terminal lucidity and started sparking on all 4 channels and holding conversations with us. So gerontologist got me to bring my daughters for the last goodbye because she said this lucid period is a very short window period and she'll slip back into her kind of semi-conscious, Alzheimer's state. Anyway, when I saw that video today and found out that it's actually both criminal and a form of torture to withhold fluids, I felt so bad. I would never, even though my mother and I had a lot of ambivalence, and there were times, especially when the will came out and the viciousness she wrote into that will, there were times I actually hated her. But as a human being, as her basic human right, as any human being alive or in the process of dying, she didn't deserve to have fluids withheld like that, swabbing her mouth with a bit of bloody sponge. Well, I think back on it, it's of course. I did ask them. I said, "Is this really necessary? Why can't she have a sip of water?" Oh, because it's more cruel then. No, they lied. They fucking lied. Anyway, after watching that documentary, my beautiful friend Lynn rang me, and I said, "Lynn, I'm terrified of ever having like a seizure or a heart attack or anything that requires emergency medical treatment because you can't trust them. They're dangerous now. They actually break all the conventions, human rights conventions. They are untrustworthy more than ever before. Didn't have a lot of faith in them after my 2007 surgery that was so vicious that my forensic psych nurse friend saw how emotionally abusive they were to me. She actually threatened the entire nursing station. She went and confronted them and threatened them all with the Health Rights Commission. She said, "What you've done to my friend is abominable." Was too. Was. I won't go into details now for YouTube because I don't want to relive the memories, and you know, I've survived it. I've fucking survived it. What is it now, 18 years later? But it was evil how I was treated and spoken to, and the nasty little quips they made, and you know, I will tell you this, one of the nurses walking down, you know, the hall to the room I shared with 3 other people said, "I'm just going to check on the poor bitch in bed." I can't remember my bed name, blah, blah, blah. I knew she meant me. I was sitting there looking at her and she walked in the door. "Oh, did you hear me, did you?" She would have known I would have heard that, by the way, the sadistic evil bitch, because she said it in this bright and breezy, loud voice. I just looked at her and went, "Yes, I heard it loud and clear, calling me a poor bitch." Anyway, when I told my then forensic psychiatric nurse friend of 40 years seasoned experience, she also was disgusted. She said, "It's so unprofessional and inappropriate and utterly venal to do that to a patient." So anyway, so that was very chilling watching that. And then I watched another video by Dr. John Campbell, who I have followed avidly since the COVID years erupted 5 years ago now. And he had a warning about WHO pushing through legislation that without any government leaders even questioning it, and asking our government leaders to step in while we still have time. Also very chilling. And then the final assault on my senses. I must be like being tortured by all the genocidal fear-mongering and doom and glooming, but the trouble is it's not imaginary, it's real, it's actually happening, people of Earth. So the final video, I've stopped watching it for now because I want to read to you W. Somerset Maugham. But the final video I started watching is from the Diary of a CEO, World War III Threat Assessment, which is also very terrifying and chilling. Basically, they're saying that we're already in World War III, and it's a war that's fought with, you know, psychological operations and the nuclear threat, and yeah, the digital age, the computer age. It's very, very terrifying, very terrifying. So I'm going to escape from all those realities that are imminent and quite terrifying by reading to you the last of the stories of Sorry, I'm just seeing that someone's responded to a comment. It's got nothing to do with me. was on another video that I watched the other day. Anyway, we're going to look at someone, and some of his stories, as you've discovered, have been a bit triggering for me. Just the synchronicities and the repeat patterns and things that I've gone through personally in the last few months. And, you know, having my heart broken by someone sadistic and venal, you know, it is what it is. And I'm conscious that some of the other members of those bands were actually quite kind of a bit worried about me in a way, and trying to, without saying a word because they're frightened of him obviously, trying to sort of guide me along to let me know don't get too upset, you know, trying to show me I don't know what the word for it, they couldn't come out in full support because they all rely, you know, on each other for their livelihoods, but I think they were kind of trying to show me that they were just as upset by the way I was being treated, and, you know, maybe I'm wishing that though. But no, I did see a lot of kind of nodding and looking quite alarmed, so I don't think I imagined all of that. So you see, we live in a very strange world where you can't trust anyone. People that you think you can trust can turn on you at any time like rabid dogs. And, you know, people are living in the now and being quite selfish and corrupt and greedy, which they've always done. But, you know, I notice in that group of people there's been a lot of marriages lately, which no harm in that. They're all in their 40s. It's time they all settled down. I do wish my daughters would settle down. Well, my youngest lives with someone, I think, and has done for quite some years now, but, you know, I wish my eldest had found love and married all settled down in a de facto relationship. We all want love in our lives, don't we? It's normal. So, and the undercurrent of that, all of that, everyone wanting to get married and cleave to each other, is fear. The fact that there's so many weddings going on tells me people are afraid of losing each other and losing their very lives. And with the post-COVIDian epoch and the damage that was done to all our health collectively, and now hospitals actively engaging in eugenics and organ harvesting. It's horrific, people of Earth. So I've kind of reached a point today where I've thought about the cruel emotional games that were played, and I just have to forgive it, because they're frightened and they're desperate. And frightened and desperate people throw all ethics and morals and even respect for themselves out the window. They grab it, very ephemeral sexual congress with just anyone, just to get their nuts off. Quite frankly, it's what happened in World War II. I know. I heard it firsthand from my mother, how people behaved. The fear of death. The fear of death. And I'm funnily enough, while everyone else has lost their heads and acted out, I fully integrated and embraced life, because life has always been tenuous for me, and I never expected to get this old, trust me on that one, with all the active threats on my life, both physical, sexual, emotional, and financial. Went on for years, people of Earth. Many, many years. So now while the world is basically careening and burning down as we speak, I'm choosing life more than ever, every day. I went out to the shops, the supermarket this afternoon to buy chocolate, because the chocolate online, they're charging $8 for just an ordinary block, and I've been seething with rage about that. Got to Coles this afternoon, and yeah, they are charging that price. However, they had a lot of Darrell Lea flavoured chocolate, branded chocolate on special. So you know what I did? Did a very naughty thing. I must be disciplined and not get stuck into it in one go. I bought 4 blocks of chocolate. I'll put that aside for days when I've got a craving and I'm not feeling well, I'm confronted with all this global societal fucking Armageddon. There's no other word to describe it. And I'll just comfort myself with a bit of chocolate in the event that the time comes when chocolate is no longer available or no longer affordable, which, as I said in the video yesterday, they're pushing the price on that up all the time. It's bizarro, bloody bizarre. Anyway, where were we? I just think. Oh yes, I was talking about forgiveness. It's hard, you know. It's very hard to forgive all that. Playing me for a fucking idiot, you know, when everyone knows I'm no idiot. I'm the woman who told everyone, say no, be defiant, hold your line. Now they hate me because, you know, for whatever reasons in their twisted little minds. But it is the way it is, and I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful that I'm alive and can still speak out about these things and remain free and remain sanguine, or as Thomas Sheridan's pithy little saying that he invented during the height of COVID, sanguinosis. Anyway, let us continue with the last of the stories. I perceive there's probably 2 or 3 videos still left with this book, so we'll read until I get tired and then we'll stop and then I'll go and watch TV or something. So, the Colonel's Lady. All this happened 2 or 3 years before the outbreak of the war. The Peregrines were having breakfast. Although they were alone and the table was long, they sat at opposite ends of it. From the walls, George Peregrine's ancestors, painted by the fashionable painters of the day, looked down upon them. The butler brought in the morning post. There were several letters for the Colonel, business letters, the Times, and a small parcel for his wife Evie. He looked at his letters and then, opening the Times, began to read it. They finished breakfast and rose from the table. He noticed that his wife hadn't opened the parcel. "What's that?" he asked. "Only some books." "Shall I open it for you?" "If you like." He hated to cut string, so with some difficulty untied the knots. "But they're all the same," he said when he had unwrapped the parcel. "What on earth do you want 6 copies of the same book for?" He opened one of them. Poetry. Then he looked at the title page. When Pyramids Decay, he read, by E.K. Hamilton. Eva Catherine Hamilton. That was his wife's maiden name. He looked at her with smiling surprise. "Have you written a book, Evie? You are a sly boots." I didn't think it would interest you very much. Would you like a copy? Well, you know poetry isn't much in my line, but yes, I'd like a copy. I'll read it. I'll take it along to my study. I've got a lot to do this morning. He gathered up the Times, his letters, and the book, and went out. His study was a large and comfortable room with a big desk, leather armchairs, and what he called trophies of the chase on the walls. On the bookshelves were works of reference, books on farming, gardening, fishing and shooting, and books on the last war in which he had won an MC and a DSO. For before his marriage he had been in the Welsh Guards. At the end of the war he retired and settled down to the life of a country gentleman in the spacious house some 20 miles from Sheffield, which one of his forebears had built in the reign of George III. George Peregrine had an estate of some 1,500 acres, which he managed with ability. He was a justice of the peace and performed his duties conscientiously. During the season he rode to hounds 2 days a week. He was a good shot, a golfer, and though now a little over 50, could still play a hard game of tennis. He could describe himself with propriety as an all-round sportsman. He had been putting on weight lately, but was still a fine figure of a man, tall, with grey curly hair, only just beginning to grow thin on the crown, frank blue eyes, good features, and a high colour. He was a public-spirited man, chairman of any number of local organisations, and, as became his class and station, a loyal member of the Conservative Party. He looked upon it as his duty to see to the welfare of the people on his estate, and it was a satisfaction to him to know that Evie could be trusted to tend the sick and succour the poor. He had built a cottage hospital on the outskirts of the village and paid the wages of a nurse out of his own pocket. All he asked of the recipients of his bounty was that at elections, county or general, they should vote for his candidate. He was a friendly man, affable to his inferiors, considerate with his tenants, and popular with the neighbouring gentry. He would have been pleased and at the same time slightly embarrassed if someone had told him he was a jolly good fellow. This was what he wanted to be. He desired no higher praise. It was hard luck that he had no children. He would have been an excellent father, kindly but strict, and would have brought up his sons as gentlemen's sons should be brought up, sent them to Eton, taught them to fish, shoot, and ride. As it was, his heir was a nephew, son of his brother, killed in a motor accident. Not a bad boy, but not a chip off the old block. No, sir, far from it. And would you believe it? His fool of a mother was sending him to a co-educational school. Evie had been a sad disappointment to him. Of course, she was a lady, and she had a bit of money of her own. She managed the house uncommonly well, and she was a good hostess. The village people adored her. She had been a pretty little thing when he married her, with creamy skin, light brown hair, and a trim figure. Healthy, too, and not a bad tennis player. He couldn't understand why she'd had no children. Of course, she was faded now. She must be getting on for 45. Her skin was drab, her hair had lost its sheen, and she was as thin as a rail. She was always neat and suitably dressed, but she didn't seem to bother how she looked. She wore no makeup and didn't even use lipstick. Sometimes at night, when she dolled herself up for a party, you could tell that once she'd been quite attractive, but ordinarily she was, well, the sort of woman you simply didn't notice. A nice woman, of course, a good wife, and it wasn't her fault if she was barren, but it was tough on a fellow who wanted an heir of his own loins. She hadn't any vitality. That's what was the matter with her. Didn't he just say that when he married her she'd be healthy? Honestly, men, even reading this, I want to slap them up the side of the head. By the gods. Anyway, carry on, people of Earth. He supposed he'd been in love with her when he asked her to marry him, at least sufficiently in love for a man who wanted to marry and settle down. But with time he discovered that they had nothing much in common. Now that can be a burden and problematic, since I had nothing at all in common with my ex-husband. Couldn't even have a fucking conversation with it. But it was like that, deliberately obtuse too. You know, awful it was. Anyway, we won't live in that ancient consciousness. Sitting here, watching the world slowly die. All the people that left me for dead 30 years ago, here we are now. One could almost have shouted for it, or accept it's my entire human species and all our progeny and all our progeny's progeny that's at risk, you understand. Anyway, just have to shake my head on that one. She didn't care about hunting, and fishing bored her. Naturally, they'd drifted apart. He had to do her the justice to admit that she'd never bothered him. There'd been no scenes. They had no quarrels. She seemed to take it for granted that he should go his own way. When he went up to London now and then, she never wanted to come with him. He had a girl there. Well, she wasn't exactly a girl. She was 35 if she was a day, but she was blonde and luscious, and he only had to wire ahead of time, and they'd dine, do a show, and spend the night together. Well, a man, a healthy, normal man, had to have some fun in his life. The thought crossed his mind that if Evie hadn't been such a good woman, she'd have been a better wife. But it was not the sort of thought that he welcomed, and he put it away from him. George Peregrine finished his Times and, being a considerate fellow, rang the bell and told the butler to take it to Evie. Then he looked at his watch. It was 10:30, and at 11 he had an appointment with one of his tenants. He had half an hour to spare. I'd better have a look at Evie's book, he said to himself. I hope she wrote about her own rip-roaring affairs that were more exciting than his boring, staid, contrived, bought and paid for one in London, am I right? The motherfucker. Oh, you have to laugh. He took it up with a smile. Evie had a lot of highbrow books in her sitting room, not the sort of books that interested him, but if they amused her, he had no objection to her reading them. He noticed that the volume he now held in his hand contained no more than 90 pages. This was all to the good. He shared Edgar Allan Poe's opinion that poems should be short, but as he turned the pages, he noticed that several of Evie's had long lines of irregular length and didn't rhyme. He didn't like that. At his first school, when he was a little boy, he remembered learning a poem that began, "The boys stood on the burning deck," and later at Eton one that started, "Ruin seize the ruthless king." And then there was Henry V. They'd had to take that, one half. He stared at Evie's pages with consternation. "That's not what I call poetry," he said. Fortunately, it wasn't all like that. Interspersed with the pieces that looked so odd, lines of 3 or 4 words, and then a line of 10 or 15, there were little poems, quite short, that rhymed, thank God, with the lines all the same length. Several of the pages were just headed with the word sonnet, and out of curiosity he counted the lines. There were 14 of them. He read them. They seemed all right, but he didn't quite know what they were all about. He repeated to himself, "Ruin seize the ruthless king." Poor Evie, he sighed. At that moment, the farmer he was expecting was ushered into the study, and putting the book down, he made him welcome. They embarked on their business. "I read your book, Evie," he said, as they sat down to lunch. "Jolly good. Did it cost you a packet to have it printed?" "No, I was lucky. I sent it to a publisher, and he took it." "Not much money in poetry, my dear," he said in his good-natured, hearty way. "No, I don't suppose there is. What did Bannock want to see you about this morning?" Bannock was the tenant who had interrupted his reading of Evie's poems to get his bloody glasses tight, and they're driving me mental, people of it. Really sliding off my head really badly today. Some days are almost bearable, but anyway, if I ever get rich and I can't bear things poking into my eyes, I have a phobia of it, but I'm actually seriously considering. I'd have to get rich first though. That's never going to happen, people are there. But you know, laser eye surgery so I could be done with glasses altogether. I remember when my mother had her eyes done. Well, I didn't know she'd had them done. I got quite a shock. We went to the Queensland Art Gallery with my friend Jared. We were all walking around together. My mother stopped stock still and stared far into the distance. Ach, the glory days, she said rather sardonically. Jared and I looked at each other. We thought she'd gone completely mad. What are you talking about, Mum? I said. You'll see. I couldn't see what she was talking about. So we keep walking, and like a fair way in the distance, because we walked a fair way, about 20 or 30 metres, we come up to this painting of fucking Nazis all lined up with their fucking swastika flags. I said, is that what you stopped and quipped about the glory days, Mum? Yes. I said, how could you see it from so far away? Haven't you noticed, she said, I don't wear glasses anymore. I hadn't noticed. Jared and I, because I didn't see her that often, it was one of our brief reconnections during one of our many estrangements, you understand. Jesus, what a fucking life. Anyway, so we're standing there and Jared looked at her and looked at me. He went, I didn't notice either, if it makes you feel any better. He said, but look at your mother's eyes. She'd always had kind of a gingerine, greeny coloured, weird looking greenish coloured eyeballs. He says, they're so crystal clear, they almost look blue. They're not that yellowy colour they used to be. My mother said, of course not. When they do it, they clean all the cataracts and the lenses, or I don't know how it's done. But yeah, her eyes were actually almost blue. I never remembered her having blue eyes in my entire life, even as a very young child. Tiny tot. I just looked at her in amazement. I said, I can't believe you saw that from such a long distance away, and you have the chutzpah to go, ach, the glory days. She said, I did it to piss you off. I knew you'd get uptight about it. But Mum, it's so fucking inappropriate with your Jewish daughter and your Jewish granddaughters. Have you no shame? She just giggled, you know. Jared just shook his head and looked at me. He said, that woman's got the most laser fucking focused eyesight. He said, I'm impressed. He said, actually, so am I. But I said, how much did that cost you to get your eyes done, Mum? $15,000. $15,000 fucking dollars. At that time period, we're talking, it was around about the year 2000. Yeah, it was between estrangements before I became estranged to her for the last time, which was 2001. My kids and I were pretty much bloody starving all the time, paying her high market rent to live in her house in Logan Lee. I just looked at Jared. I said, it's unconscionable and disgraceful, but what can you do? I have to have somewhere to live, and I'm renting from her, and $15,000 to get her eyes done while we starve. Jared just nodded. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a jealous person. I don't begrudge my mum spending the money to get her eyes done. But she was just that fucking selfish and unconscionable and kind of fucking evil. Anyway, I won't be getting my eyes done because I'm not spending $15,000 I don't have on eyeballs. Wouldn't it be nice though? I could make my videos and I could look at you and I could be like, not sliding away the whole time. Wonky, wonky, wonky. Wonkity, donkity, doo. Doobie doobie doo, babies. Speaking of doobies, but never mind. Haven't had any of that for a very long time. Jesus. Well, anyway, let us continue with my story, which is actually my mother's favourite author's story, so it's probably why she came to my mind. No, it was the laser eye surgery that triggered that memory. Yes, stick to the facts, tiny arrows. Right, where were we? Bannock was the tenant who had interrupted his reading of Evie's poems. He's asked me to advance the money for a pedigree bull he wants to buy. He's a good man, and I've half a mind to do it. George Peregrine saw that Evie didn't want to talk about her book, and he was not sorry to change the subject. He was glad she had used her maiden name on the title page. He didn't suppose anyone would ever hear about the book, but he was proud of his own unusual name, and he wouldn't have liked it if some damned penny a liner had made fun of Evie's effort in one of the papers. Sounds a bit narcissistic to me, that one. Very, very self-absorbed. That's probably why she chose to write it in her maiden name. During the few weeks that followed, he thought it tactful not to ask Evie any questions about her venture into verse, and she never referred to it. It might have been a discreditable incident that they had silently agreed not to mention, but then a strange thing happened. He had to go to London on business, and he took Daphne out to dinner. That was the name of the girl with whom he was. It sounded like someone banging on the door, but then it was. I might just check. There's no one at the door, but that was the possums creating anarchy and chaos out there. I know, because I keep finding their poos every morning. Oh, shucks, my food for you today. A very naughty tosser. Just as I suspected, a big fat possum had leapt off the roof and into the tree. Right, where were we? I'll just repeat that sentence. It might have been a discreditable incident that they had silently agreed not to mention, but then a strange thing happened. He had to go to London on business, and he took Daphne out to dinner. That was the name of the girl with whom he was in the habit of passing a few agreeable hours whenever he went to town. "Oh, George," she said, "is that your wife who's written a book they're all talking about? What on earth do you mean?" "Well, there's a fellow I know who's a critic. He took me out to dinner the other night, and he had a book with him." "Got anything for me to read?" I said. "What's that?" "Oh, I don't think that's your cup of tea," he said. "It's poetry. I've just been reviewing it." "No poetry for me," I said. "It's about the hottest stuff I ever read," he said. "Selling like hotcakes, and it's damned good." Who's the book by? Asked George. A woman called Hamilton. My friend told me that wasn't her real name. He said her real name was Peregrine. Funny, I said. I know a fellow called Peregrine. Colonel in the army, he said. Lives near Sheffield. I'd just as soon you didn't talk about me to your friends, said George, with a frown of vexation. Keep your shirt on, dearie. Who'd you take me for? I just said it's not the same one. Daphne giggled. My friend said, they say he's a regular Colonel Blimp. George had a keen sense of humour. You could tell them better than that, he laughed. If my wife had written a book, I'd be the first to know about it, wouldn't I? I suppose you would. Anyhow, the matter didn't interest her, and when the Colonel began to talk of other things, she forgot about it. He put it out of his mind too. There was nothing to it, he decided. And that silly fool of a critic had just been pulling Daphne's leg. He was amused at the thought of her tackling that book because she had been told it was hot stuff and then finding it just a lot of bosh cut up with unequal lines. He was a member of several clubs, and next day he thought he'd lunch at one in St. James Street. He was catching a train back to Sheffield early in the afternoon. He was sitting in a comfortable armchair, having a glass of sherry before going into the dining room when an old friend came up to him. Well, old boy, how's life? He said. How'd you like being the husband of a celebrity? George Peregrine looked at his friend. He thought he saw an amused twinkle in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, he answered. Come off it, George. Everyone knows E.K. Hamilton is your wife. Not often a book of verse has a success like that. Look here, Henry Dashwood is lunching with me. He'd like to meet you. Who the devil is Henry Dashwood, and why would he want to meet me? Oh, my dear fellow, what do you do with yourself all the time in the country? Henry is about the best critic we've got. He wrote a wonderful review of Evie's book. Do you mean to say she didn't show it to you? Before George could answer, his friend had called a man over. A tall, thin man with a high forehead, a beard, a long nose, and a stoop. Just the sort of man whom George was prepared to dislike at first sight. Introductions were effected. Henry Dashwood sat down. Is Mrs. Peregrine in London by any chance? I should very much like to meet her, he said. No, my wife doesn't like London. She prefers the country, said George stiffly. She wrote me a very nice letter about my review. I was pleased. You know, we critics get more kicks than halfpence. I was simply bowled over by her book. It's so fresh and original, very modern without being obscure. She seems to be as much at her ease in free verse as in the classical metres. Then, because he was a critic, he thought he should criticise. Sometimes her ear is a trifle at fault, but you can say the same of Emily Dickinson. There are several of those short lyrics of hers that might have been written by Landor. All this was gibberish to George Peregrine. The man was nothing but a disgusting highbrow. But the Colonel had good manners, and he answered with proper civility. Henry Dashwood went on as though he hadn't spoken. But what makes the book so outstanding is the passion that throbs in every line. So many of these young poets are so anemic, cold, bloodless, dully intellectual. But here you have real, naked, earthy passion. Of course, deep, sincere emotion like that is tragic. I hear you, sister. Ah, my dear Colonel, how right Heine was when he said that the poet makes little songs out of his great sorrows. You know, and now and then, as I read and reread those heart-rending pages, I thought of Sappho. This was too much for George Peregrine, and he got up. Well, it's jolly nice of you to say such nice things about my wife's little book. I'm sure she'll be delighted. But I must bolt. I've got to catch a train, and I want to get a bite of lunch. Damned fool, he said irritably to himself as he walked upstairs to the dining room. He got home in time for dinner, and after Evie had gone to bed, he went into his study and looked for her book. He thought he'd just glance through it again to see for himself what they were making such a fuss about, but he couldn't find it. Evie must have taken it away. Silly, he muttered. He told her he thought it jolly good. What more could a fellow be expected to say? Well, it didn't matter. He lit his pipe and read The Field till he felt sleepy. But a week or so later it happened that he had to go into Sheffield for the day. He lunched there at his club. He had nearly finished when the Duke of Haverhill came in. This was the great local magnate, and of course the Colonel knew him, but only to say, "How do you do?" too, and he was surprised when the Duke stopped at his table. "We're so sorry your wife couldn't come with us for the weekend," he said, with a sort of shy cordiality. "We're expecting rather a nice lot of people." George was taken aback. He guessed that the Haverhills had asked him and Evie over for the weekend, and Evie, without saying a word to him about it, had refused. He had the presence of mind to say he was sorry too. "Better luck next time," said the Duke pleasantly, and moved on. Colonel Peregrine was very angry, and when he got home he said to his wife, "Look here, what's this about our being asked over to Haverhill? Why on earth did you say we couldn't go? We've never been asked before, and it's the best shooting in the country." "I didn't think of that. I thought it would only bore you." "Damn it all, you might at least have asked me if I wanted to go." "I'm sorry." He looked at her closely. There was something in her expression that he didn't quite understand. He frowned. "I suppose I was asked, he barked. Evie flushed a little. Well, in point of fact, you weren't. I call it damned rude of them to ask you without asking me. I suppose they thought it wasn't your sort of party. The Duchess is rather fond of writers and people like that, you know. She's having Henry Dashwood, the critic, and for some reason he wants to meet me. It was damned nice of you to refuse, Evie. It's the least I could do, she smiled. She hesitated a moment. George, my publishers want to give a little dinner party for me one day towards the end of the month, and of course they want you to come too. Oh, I don't think that's quite my mark. I'll come up to London with you if you like. I'll find someone to dine with. Daphne. I expect it'll be very dull, but they'll make rather a point of it. And the day after, the American publisher who's taken my book is giving a cocktail party at Claridge's. I'd like you to come to that, if you wouldn't mind. Sounds like a crashing bore, but if you really want me to come, I'll come. It would be sweet of you. George Peregrine was dazed by the cocktail party. There were a lot of people. Some of them didn't look so bad. A few of the women were decently turned out, but the men seemed to him pretty awful. He was introduced to everyone as Colonel Peregrine, E.K. Hamilton's husband, you know. The men didn't seem to have anything to say to him, but the women gushed. You must be proud of your wife. Isn't it wonderful? You know, I read it right through at a sitting. I simply couldn't put it down. And when I'd finished, I started again at the beginning and read it right through a second time. I was simply thrilled. The English publisher said to him, We've not had a success like this with a book of verse for 20 years. I've never seen such reviews. The American publisher said to him, It's swell. It'd be a smash hit in America. You wait and see. The American... Sorry about that, couldn't help myself. The American publisher had sent Evie a great spray of orchids. Well, I'm well impressed by that, darlings. Damned ridiculous, thought George. As they came in, people were taken up to Evie, and it was evident that they said flattering things to her, which she took with a pleasant smile and a word or two of thanks. She was a trifle flushed with the excitement, but seemed quite at her ease. Got someone in my head yelling at me that I need to go to Paddington. Why would I go to Paddington at 7:04 p.m. on a Friday night? Lefty's nightclub is at Paddington. Who's playing at Paddington tonight? I should go, shouldn't I? Haven't been dancing for a month. Let's have a look. Paddington. I'll just look up Lefties because I happen to know that's in Paddington. Let's have a look at your good guide. What's the date today? Oh, it's the 11th. Nobody I know. I wonder why they want me to go to Paddington. Mama T's not going anywhere tonight. The Mama T is staying home and keeping warm. It's very odd. Very, very odd indeed. Right. My friend Timmy Bishop, who plays for the Mike Beale band, is playing there on the 25th of July. But I haven't been to Lefties in quite some years either. So, Paddington. Anyway, I have no idea what that's about. Sometimes my spirit people jump in and random things and it doesn't make sense, but later on it kind of does. But you know what I mean. Right. Where were we? Though he thought the whole thing a lot of stuff and nonsense, George noted with approval that his wife was carrying it off in just the right way. Well, there's one thing, he said to himself. You can see she's a lady, and there's a damned sight more than you can say of anyone here. That's a damned sight more than you can say of anyone else here. Oh dear goddess, got there in the end, people. He drank a good many cocktails, but there was one thing that bothered him. He had a notion that some of the people he was introduced to looked at him in a rather funny sort of way. He couldn't quite make out what it meant, and once when he strolled by two women who were sitting together on a sofa, he had the impression that they were talking about him, and after he passed he was almost certain they tittered. He was very glad when the party came to an end. In the taxi on their way back to their hotel, Evie said to him, You were wonderful, dear. You made quite a hit. The girls simply raved about you. They thought you so handsome. Girls, he said bitterly. Old hags. Were you bored, dear? Stiff. He pressed his hand in a gesture of sympathy. She pressed his hand in a gesture of sympathy. I hope you won't mind if we wait and go down by the afternoon train. I've got some things to do in the morning. No, that's all right. Shopping? I do want to buy one or two things, but I've got to go and be photographed. I hate the idea, but they think I ought to be. For America, you know. He said nothing, but he thought. He thought it would be a shock to the American public when they saw the portrait of the homely, desiccated little woman who was his wife. It's not very kind, is it? What a way to think about your wife. Oh, by the gods, please tell me that she ditches him by the end of the story. I'm just itching for her to ditch him. Yes. Right, where were we? Do you love how I get immersed in the story too? Can't help myself. I've always been that way. She'd always been under the impression that they liked he'd always been under the impression that they liked glamour in America. Indeed they do. Very glamorous people, by and large. Except if you're shopping at Walmart, you understand. Don't mention what happens in Walmart. Some people go shopping there without any underwear on. And bikinis. And other outrageous things I don't dare even think about. But anyway, where were we? He went on thinking. And next morning, when Evie had gone out, he went to his club and up to the library. There he looked up recent numbers of the Times Literary Supplement, the New Statesman, and the Spectator. Presently, he found reviews of Evie's book. He didn't read them very carefully, but enough to see that they were extremely favourable. Then he went to the booksellers in Piccadilly, where he occasionally bought books. Just trying to remember. Paddington Bear. Paddington Bear, you know, that little TV show, sort of show that was on with children. Didn't he live at Piccadilly? No, that can't be right. He must have lived at Paddington, mustn't he? If he was Paddington Bear. Just wondering why they mentioned that to me. It's going to grind my gears all night till I find out. Oh. Anyway, where were we? Then he went to the booksellers in Piccadilly, where he occasionally bought books. He'd made up his mind that he had to read this damned thing of Evie's properly, but he didn't want to ask her what she'd done with the copies she'd given him. He'd buy one for himself. Before going in, he looked in the window, and the first thing he saw was a display of When Pyramids Decay. Damn silly title. He went in. A young man came forward and asked if he could help him. No, I'm just having a look round. It embarrassed him to ask for Evie's book, and he thought he'd find it for himself and then take it to the salesman. But he couldn't see it anywhere, and at last, finding the young man near him, he said in a carefully casual tone, "By the way, have you got a book called When Pyramids Decay? The new edition came in this morning. I'll get a copy." In a moment the young man returned with it. He was a short, rather stout young man, with a shock of untidy, carroty hair and spectacles. Trying to decide if I'm going to whack on makeup and go out somewhere tonight. Nah, can't be bothered. George Peregrine, tall, upstanding, very military, towered over him. "Is this a new edition, then?" he asked. "Yes, sir, the 5th. It might be a novel, the way it's selling." George Peregrine hesitated a moment. "Why do you suppose it's such a success? I've always been told no one reads poetry." "Well, it's good, you know. I've read it myself." The young man, though obviously cultured, had a slight Cockney accent, and George quite instinctively adopted a patronising attitude. "It's the story they like. Sexy, you know, but tragic." George frowned a little. He was coming to the conclusion that the young man was rather impertinent. No one had told him anything about there being a story in the damned book, and he had not gathered that from reading the reviews. The young man went on. "Of course it's only a flash in the pan, if you know what I mean. The way I look at it, she was sort of inspired by a personal experience, like Houseman was with the Shropshire lad. She'll never write anything else." "How much is the book?" said George coldly, to stop his chatter. "You needn't wrap it up. I'll just slip it into my pocket." The November morning was raw and he was wearing a greatcoat. At the station, he bought the evening papers and magazines, and he and Evie settled themselves comfortably in opposite corners of a first-class carriage and read. At 5 o'clock, they went along to the restaurant car to have tea, chatted a little. They arrived. They drove home in the car which was waiting for them. They bathed, dressed for dinner, and after dinner Evie, saying she was tired out, went to bed. She kissed him, as was her habit, on the forehead. Then he went into the hall, took Evie's book out of his greatcoat pocket, and going into the study began to read it. He didn't read verse very easily, and though he read with attention every word of it, the impression he received was far from clear. Then he began at the beginning again and read it a second time. He read with increasing malaise, but he was not a stupid man, and when he had finished, he had a distinct understanding of what it was all about. Part of the book was in free verse, part in conventional meters, but the story it related was coherent and plain to the meanest intelligence. It was the story of a passionate love affair between an older woman, married, and a young man. George Peregrine made out the steps of it as easily as if he had been doing a sum and simple addition. Written in the first person, it began with the tremulous surprise of the woman past her youth, when it dawned upon her that the young man was in love with her. She hesitated to believe it. She thought she must be deceiving herself, and she was terrified when on a sudden she discovered that she was passionately in love with him. Mama T has only to sigh at that. Dear goddess. We won't be speaking so right now, although I have no idea what I just said, but it sounded very interesting. My apologies to actual Xhosa speakers. I'm not wishing to be cultural misappropriate, you understand. Anyway, where was I? I just got myself in a whole lot of trouble there, didn't I? I'm not racist, by the way. I'm not. I'm most definitely not racist, unlike my mother could be at times. Some very odd ideas, but she did grow up in that awful regime. And sometimes she did things, awful things, just to wind us all up, sit back and literally watch us all get all het up over things and then laugh. That possum's having a whale of a time out there, bumping his way around. Right, anyway, where was I? She told herself it was absurd. With the disparity of age between them, nothing but unhappiness could come to her if she yielded to her emotion. She tried to prevent him from speaking, but the day came when he told her that he loved her and forced her to tell him that she loved him too. He begged her to run away with him. She couldn't leave her husband, her home, and what life could they look forward to? She, an aging woman, he so young. How could she expect his love to last? Indeed, it never does, you know. It never ever does. She begged him to have mercy on her, but his love was impetuous. He wanted her. He wanted her with all his heart, and at last, trembling, afraid, desirous, she yielded to him. Then there was a period of ecstatic happiness. The world, the dull, humdrum world of every day, blazed with glory. Love songs flowed from her pen. The woman worshipped the young of her old body, of her lover. I shouldn't laugh. George flushed darkly when she praised his broad chest and slim flanks, the beauty of his legs and the flatness of his belly. Hot stuff, Daphne's friend had said. It was that all right. Disgusting. There were sad little pieces in which she lamented the emptiness of her life when, as must happen, he left her. But they ended with a cry that all she had to suffer would be worth it for the bliss that for a while had been hers. She wrote of the long, tremulous nights they passed together, and the languor that lulled them to sleep in one another's arms. I shouldn't laugh. She wrote of the rapture of brief, stolen moments when, braving all danger, their passion overwhelmed them as they surrendered to its call. She thought it would be an affair of a few weeks, but miraculously it lasted. Oh, well done you, tiddly-pom, flip on the chin. Go, girlfriend. Didn't I say at the beginning of the story? Hope she gets revenge on that boring dead shit. So she did, in the most delightful way. Not that I endorse adultery and, sexual impropriety, you understand, but there's just times when it's just the most perfect thing that could happen to a man and a woman. Just delightful. Right, anyway, where were we? One of the poems I have to laugh. Well, anyway, one of the poems referred to 3 years having gone by without lessening the love that filled their hearts. Now that's quite a long affair, 3 years. That's a commitment. It looked as though he continued to press her to go away with him, far away, to a hill town in Italy, a Greek island, a walled city in Tunisia, so that they could be together always. For in another of the poems she besought him to let things be as they were. Their happiness was precarious. Perhaps it was owing to the difficulties they had to encounter and the rarity of their meetings that their love had retained for so long its first enchanting ardour. Then, on a sudden, the young man died Oh, I was just getting excited for her there. How, when, or where George could not discover. There followed a long, heartbroken cry of bitter grief, grief she could not indulge in, grief that had to be hidden. She had to be cheerful, give dinner parties, and go out to dinner, behave as she had always behaved, though the light had gone out of her life and she was bowed down with anguish. The last poem of all was a set of 4 short stanzas, in which the writer, sadly resigned to her loss, thanked the dark powers that rule man's destiny, that she had been privileged, at least for a while, to enjoy the greatest happiness that we poor human beings can ever hope to know. God bless. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when George Peregrine finally put the book down. It had seemed to him that he heard Evie's voice in every line. Over and over again he came upon turns of phrase he had heard her use. There were details that were as familiar to him as to her. There was no doubt about it. It was her own story she had told, and it was as plain as anything could be that she had had a lover and her lover had died. It was not anger so much that he felt, nor horror or dismay, though he was dismayed and he was horrified, but amazement. It was as inconceivable that Evie should have had a love affair, and a wildly passionate one at that, as that the trout in the glass case over the chimney-piece in his study, the finest he had ever caught, should suddenly wag its tail. He understood now the meaning, the amused look he had seen in the eyes of that man he had spoken to at the club. He understood why Daphne, when she was talking about the book, had seemed to be enjoying a private joke, and why those 2 women at the cocktail party had tittered when he strolled past them. He broke out into a sweat. Then, on a sudden, he was seized with fury, and he jumped up to go and awake Evie and ask her sternly for an explanation. But he stopped at the door. After all, what proof had he? A book. He remembered that he'd told Evie he thought it jolly good. True, he hadn't read it, but he'd pretended he had. He would look a perfect fool if he had to admit that. I must watch my step, he muttered. He made up his mind to wait for 2 or 3 days and think it all over. Then he'd decide what to do. He went to bed, but he couldn't sleep for a long time. Evie, he kept saying to himself. Evie, of all people. They met at breakfast next morning as usual. Evie was as she always was, quiet, demure, and self-possessed. A middle-aged woman who made no effort to look younger than she was. A woman who had nothing of what he still called it, the it factor. Vavavarum, babies. He looked at her as he hadn't looked at her for years. She had her usual placid serenity. Her pale blue eyes were untroubled. There was no sign of guilt on her candid brow. She made the same little casual remarks she always made. It's nice to get back to the country again after those 2 hectic days in London. What are you going to do this morning? It was incomprehensible. 3 days later he went to his solicitor. Henry Blaine was an old friend of George's, as well as his lawyer. He had a place not far from Peregrine's, and for years they had shot over one another's preserves. I hope they do mean shooting on each other's lands, because that could be taken multifarious levels, people, though. Get off my preserve and don't overshoot, you pervert. Can't help myself. I should have gone dancing tonight, can you tell? Mischief. There's mischief in the mummy. It's a full moon. Well, it was a full moon. And the gods are calling to me. Well, it's like that sometimes. Call of the wild. I was thinking, there was a few, far too young by the way, but there were a few lovely young men that approached me, in the last 2 years when I was dancing at the Brooklyn Standard, and they got given short shrift by my very protective and perhaps jealous friends in the bands, keeping me preserved for my one and only who didn't want me anyway and ran off with another woman. Like, how very rude was that? You could have let me have the young ones, I'm quite partial to younger men. And it's not like I'm married. And if they weren't married, and if they were over the age of consent, reasonably well over the age of consent, like in their late 20s, how bad could it have been? You spiteful, bloodless curs, denying me my one little bit of sexual mischief, keeping me on the back burner while you frotted around behind my back. Fuck you! There, I've said it. It's out. Better out than in it. Anyway, I don't actually go for young men anymore. I haven't for many years because, as you could tell by my amusement earlier, those things never last, even though they might be a bit of fun. Just a little bit of flash in the pan frivolity that goes nowhere, and the mama too's manifesting a true love partner for herself that's there for longer than one night, you understand, or longer than one afternoon delight as well. Oh, bless. Anyway, you have to laugh. Can't take it seriously, people. That you really can't. Maybe I should go and have a shower, put on makeup, and rock the fucking Casbah. Next weekend, we'll see what's shaking next weekend. I could go tomorrow night and dance for Phoenix Rising, which is kind of, because I'm a risen phoenix myself, it's kind of kismet, you understand. So I'll think about that. If I'm not too tired, there's always tomorrow night. And yes, that way I'm not ruffling any fucking feathers and what have you. We'll see how I feel. Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, shooting over one another's preserves. For 2 days a week he was a country gentleman, and for the other 5 a busy lawyer in Sheffield. He was a tall, robust fellow with a boisterous manner and a jovial laugh, which suggested that he liked to be looked upon essentially as a sportsman and a good fellow, and only incidentally as a lawyer. But he was shrewd and they've written here worldly wise, but I know he meant worldly wise. Worldly wise. Wow. At our age, if you haven't become a little bit worldly wise by now, you're never gonna make it, babies. Well, George, what's brought you here today? He boomed as the Colonel was shown into his office. Have a good time in London. I'm taking my missus up for a few days next week. How's Evie? It's about Evie I've come to see you, said Peregrine, giving him a suspicious look. Have you read her book? His sensitivity had been sharpened during those last days of troubled thought, and he was conscious of a faint change in the lawyer's expression. It was as though he were suddenly on his guard. Yes, I've read it. Great success, isn't it? Fancy Evie breaking out into poetry. Wonders will never cease. George Peregrine was inclined to lose his temper. It's made me look a perfect damned fool. Oh, what nonsense, George. There's no harm in Evie's writing a book. You ought to be jolly proud of her. Don't talk such rot. It's her own story. You know it and everyone else knows it. I suppose I'm the only one who doesn't know who her lover was. There is such a thing as imagination, old boy. There's no reason to suppose the whole thing isn't made up. Look here, Henry. We've known one another all our lives. We've had all sorts of good times together. Be honest with me. Can you look me in the face and tell me you believe it's a made-up story? Henry Blaine moved uneasily in his chair. He was disturbed by the distress in old George's voice. You've got no right to ask me a question like that. Ask Evie. I daren't, George answered after an anguished pause. I'm afraid she'd tell me the truth. There was an uncomfortable silence. Who was the chap? Henry Blaine looked at him straight in the eye. I don't know, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you. You swine! Don't you see what a position I'm in? Do you think it's very pleasant to be made absolutely ridiculous? The lawyer lit a cigarette and for some moments silently puffed it. I don't see what I can do for you, he said at last. You've got private detectives you employ, I suppose? I want you to put them on the job and let them find everything out. It's not very pretty to put detectives on one's wife, old boy, and besides, taking for granted for a moment that Evie had an affair. It was a good many years ago, and I don't suppose it would be possible to find out a thing. They seem to have covered their tracks pretty carefully. I don't care. You put the detectives on. I want to know the truth. I won't, George. If you're determined to do that, you'd better consult someone else. And look here, even if you got evidence that Evie had been unfaithful to you, what would you do with it? You'd look rather silly divorcing your wife because she'd committed adultery 10 years ago. At all events, I could have it out with her. You can do that now, but you know just as well as I do that if you do, she'll leave you. Do you want her to do that?" George gave him an unhappy look. "I don't know. I always thought she'd been a damned good wife to me. She runs the house perfectly. We never have any servant trouble. She's done wonders with the garden, and she's splendid with all the village people." Sorry, I just had a vision of village people, the band popped into my mind. "I'm sure she is. Quite the party girl, our Evie. You go, girlfriend. Yes, YMCA. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. But damn it, I have my self-respect to think of. How can I go on living with her when I know that she was grossly unfaithful to me? Have you always been faithful to her?" "More or less, you know. After all, we've been married for nearly 24 years, and Evie was never much for bed." The solicitor slightly raised his eyebrows, but George was too intent on what he was saying to notice. "I don't deny that I've had a bit of fun now and then. A man wants it. Women are different." "We only have men's word for that," said Harry Blaine, with a faint smile. Yes, Harry Blaine. Worldly wise after all, my darling. A real man. Evie's absolutely the last woman I'd have suspected of kicking over the traces. I mean, she's a very fastidious, reticent woman. What on earth made her write the damned book? I suppose it was a very poignant experience, and perhaps it was a relief to her to get it off her chest like that. Oh, Tanyula, Tanyula, Tanyula. Right, where were we? Well, if she had to write it, why the devil didn't she write it under an assumed name? She used her maiden name. I suppose she thought that was enough, and it would have been if the book hadn't had this amazing boom. George Peregrine and the lawyer were sitting opposite one another with a desk between them. George, his elbow on the desk, his cheek on his hand, frowned at his thought. It's so rotten not to know what sort of a chap he was. One can't even tell if he was by way of being a gentleman. I mean, for all I know, he may have been a farmhand or a clerk in a lawyer's office. Harry Blaine did not permit himself to smile, and when he answered, there was in his eyes a kindly, tolerant look. Knowing Evie so well, I think the probabilities are that he was all right. Anyhow, I'm sure he wasn't a clerk in my office. It's been a shock to me, the Colonel sighed. I thought she was fond of me. She couldn't have written that book unless she hated me. Oh, I don't believe that. I don't think she's capable of hatred. You're not going to pretend that she loves me? No. Well, what does she feel for me? Henry Blaine leaned back in his swivel chair and looked at George reflectively. Indifference, I should say. The Colonel gave a little shudder and reddened. After all, you're not in love with her, are you? George Peregrine did not answer directly. It's been a great blow to me not to have any children, but I've never let her see that I think she's let me down. I've always been kind to her. Within reasonable limits, I've tried to do my duty by her. The lawyer passed a large hand over his mouth to conceal the smile that trembled on his lips. It's been such an awful shock to me, Peregrine went on. Damn it all, even 10 years ago Evie was no chicken, and God knows she wasn't much to look at. It's so ugly. He sighed deeply. What would you do in my place? Nothing. George Peregrine drew himself bolt upright in his chair, and he looked at Harry with the stern, set face that he must have worn when he inspected his regiment. I can't overlook a thing like this. I've been made a laughing stock. I can never hold up my head again. Nonsense, said the lawyer sharply, and then in a pleasant, kindly manner, listen, old boy, the man's dead. It all happened a long while back. Forget it. Talk to people about Evie's book. Rave about it. Tell them how proud you are of her. Behave as though you had so much confidence in her. You knew she could never have been unfaithful to you. The world moves so quickly, and people's memories are so short. They'll forget. I shan't forget. You're both middle-aged people. She probably does a great deal more for you than you think, and you'd be awfully lonely without her. I don't think it matters if you don't forget. It'll be all to the good if you can get it into that thick head of yours that there's a lot more in Evie than you ever had the gumption to see. Amen, brother, to that. Damn it all, you talk as if I was to blame. No, I don't think you were to blame, but I'm not so sure that Evie was either. I don't suppose she wanted to fall in love with this boy. Do you remember those verses right at the end? The impression they gave me was that, although she was shattered by his death, in a strange sort of way, she welcomed it. All through she'd been aware of the fragility of the tie that bound them. He died in the full flush of his first love, and had never known that love so seldom endures. He'd only known its bliss and beauty. In her own bitter grief, she found solace in the thought that he'd been spared all sorrow. All that's a bit above my head, old boy. I see more or less what you mean. George Peregrine stared unhappily at the inkstand on the desk. He was silent, and the lawyer looked at him with curious yet sympathetic eyes. Do you realize what courage she must have had never by a sign to show how dreadfully unhappy she was? He said gently. Colonel Peregrine sighed. I'm broken. I suppose you're right. It's no good crying over spilt milk, and it would only make things worse. if I made a fuss. Well, George Peregrine gave a pitiful little smile. I'll take your advice. I'll do nothing. Let them think me a damned fool, and to hell with them. The truth is, I don't know what I'd do without Evie, but I tell you what, there's one thing I shall never understand till my dying day. What in the name of heaven did the fellow ever see in her? The end. Right. The next story is quite long, so we'll save that for tomorrow. 2 more stories to go, people. There. We'll have completed this mission with its synchronicities and its delicious triggering, and sometimes humour, and sometimes pathos, sometimes sardonic wit. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Bye for now, people there. Have a wonderful Friday night here in the Southern Hemisphere, Brisbane, Australia, and the rest of your weekend. May it be wonderful too. Bye for now.